Okay, so now please welcome to the City Club, Jay Inslee and Steve Scher.
I wanted to bring this to a wider audience, so Mr. Inslee's familiar with this, but you all will have to be accepting of the duel. Let me start with a local question and something I've been thinking about. How can we think that exporting coal to China has and the economic benefit we may gain from that anyway comes up to equal the global, not the Northwest, but the global impact that continuing to burn coal is going to have?
Well, first, Steve, I want to thank you for starting on such an easy question so that we could, there's no controversy associated in this. I'm glad that you allowed me to ease in and say some nice things about Bellingham. Before we could start, I could talk about my brother's career at Bellingham High School, my third son's graduation from Western Washington University. I thought maybe we could talk about those a little bit, but let me jump into this issue. I think there actually may be two questions in this, if I can, and I think both of them are important. Let me address the one that's implicit in your question, which is the local one, which is a siting decision of particular, maybe 5 coal ports in the Pacific Northwest, not just the one at Cherry Point. And those are what I might think of local decisions involving siting decisions, where we have to make sure that we look at the cumulative impact of all of the results of these multiple trains, both from the environmental perspective and the jobs perspective, and I focus on the jobs perspective. We have to look very carefully, I think, at both the pros and cons from the jobs perspective, because there are some obvious pros of job creation in the construction of these ports and in their operation. But there are also a significant potential deleterious impact on job creation in the cities that are up and down these corridors. I talked to a city councilman from Washougal a few weeks ago who talked about, we feel like our town will be cut in two with anywhere from 18 to 40 trains a day, and that's going to have severe economic dislocation for our small businesses in our town. So on the local perspective, we have got to have a very thorough, very comprehensive, very open and transparent discussion of all of the impacts associated with these potential ports, and they are significant. That's on the local side. But on the larger side, the question is really about, burning coal and the results of burning coal worldwide. Here's what I believe. I believe that our state can lead the world in the creation of a new energy economy that can create thousands of jobs in our state by developing alternatives to coal and alternatives to oil and gas. And the reason I believe that is I am seeing that happening across the state of Washington, where entrepreneurs are putting a little capital together with brilliant ideas and hardworking people, and they are growing businesses in a way that does not damage our climate. Let me just give you one example. I was on the boat yesterday. I live on Bainbridge Island. I was going to work and I was talking to my staff, and I said, I'm going to Bellingham tomorrow. I hear there's a new solar plant up in Whatcom County that makes solar cells. And I said, let's get a hold of the people involved in that. I'd like to know what they're doing. Hung up. 5 minutes later, I'm walking up the boat, and a guy named Kelly Swanson walks up and says, I'm the president of iTech Energy. We're developing solar cells in Whatcom County, and we're selling them hopefully around the world. And I'm hearing those stories around this state. The world's most durable solar panel, the most durable solar panel in the world today is made in Marysville, Washington, the Silicon Energy Company. The Western Hemisphere's largest energy efficiency company is in Seattle and Spokane at McKinstry, and McDonald is also doing work in that regard. The Western Hemisphere's largest manufacturer of silicon substrate for solar panels is in Moses Lake, Washington. So I believe we have a destiny as a state to do what we have done in the past. We led a first technological revolution in aerospace. We led a second technological revolution in software. And I believe it is our destiny and our calling and our economic opportunity to lead the world in a technological revolution, to develop new ways to power our cars, heat our homes, and save our planet at the same time. And I'm proud to be a governor who's going to help our state do that. I believe strongly about this.
With all due respect. But 4 years from now, 8 years from now, let's again set aside the siting issues. I understand that. If we are the ones that export all that coal to China and it burns in China, we are still playing catch up with, I would think, unless you have a different vision, with all those industries. So where does a governor say, not here, this is not the right way to pursue these policies?
Well, what a governor can do is help to create industries to replace the need for coal. And like I'm saying, we are doing this in the state of Washington, and we can accelerate that process dramatically. In my jobs creation plan, I have a host of new ideas to help accelerate the creation of alternatives as an alternative to coal. The Chinese, by the way, are making significant investments in solar, and that's one of the reasons they're actually trying to underbid us with some of their, I think, illicit subsidies in this regard. My view is that the thing that we have got to focus on is growing alternatives to sell to the world so that coal is not necessary, or at least reduced in its necessity. Now, you are correct in this statement. If we burn all of the coal that we know exists in the world today, Washington State will not look the way it looks like today. You may have noticed that an oyster growing operation in Washington State had to move its operations to Hawaii to produce the baby oysters that have to take calcium carbonate, and they can't do it as well now because the waters are more acidic. We do know a scientific principle that if we do burn all the coal that we know exists in the world today, our grandchildren will really find Washington State hard to recognize, given the acidity in Puget Sound. The damage to our pine forests are now being ravaged by beetles on the east side of the Cascades, the reduction in snowpack that we will have. It will be a very different state, and I don't intend to allow that in my house. That's why I am dedicated to the creation of new technologies that will make some of this fossil fuel obsolete. And we can do this, and we can lead the state. And the reason I believe this is right down our alley. This is what Washington does so well. We don't have a lot of coal or oil. We have intellectual capital. We invent, we create, we build. The resource we depend upon is not below our feet, it is above our shoulders. And I have a proposal to maximize the use of that intellectual resource, and that's what we're going to do.
Do you have any particular specific tax breaks that you would get rid of in order to find more revenue?
Well, I would suggest what I have proposed is this. I have proposed that all but the most sure to remain tax loopholes should have to maintain legislative scrutiny on a regular basis. And the reason I say that is that we have a pattern, that somebody might come in 1908 and say, I've got this great technology and we can build an industry, it's called radio. And if we just get a little tax break here, radio is really going to take off. And you get to 12,012 and the subsidy and the tax break is still there, right? And why do we still have that? So we need to have these things that you have to have a sunset provision that the legislators have to vote. The industry has to come in and actually justify its existence, that it actually creates jobs. And if we do that, we're going to find some. I have yet to see someone articulate why we have to have a bull insemination tax break to keep our economy going, and we do right now. Now, that's not going to solve the fiscal problems of the state of Washington, but there are some things that can help.
By the way, do you know that FM radio exists because the federal government gave all the institutions like the University of Washington FM signals, and that's why there's KUOW.
Right, and the reason...
all right, so can we expect from Governor Inslee a bill that would specifically demand the legislature look at tax loopholes and clarify them each year? Or each session?
Yes, but you realize this has to start in the legislative bodies, they get to introduce the bills. So you'll have to talk to Kevin
Well,
about
you
this.
can, I believe the governor can twist some arms, though, and make some things happen.
I've got some friends. I think we'll get some people to introduce that. I think Ruben Carbajal has introduced a bill basically of this nature already that ought to be considered. Look, this ought not to be considered some partisan ideological issue. This is just good government. The tax system has to reflect the economic realities of today, not 50 or 60 years ago. There are some really good exemptions, as I'm proposing, right now for some of these new industries that make sense. But as the economy changes, the tax code, on occasion, needs to get scrubbed for barnacles that accrete on the fiscal hull of the state. And that's basically what we're doing, okay?
We'll just let that one sink in. I want to come back to revenues again, but let me ask about education in specifics. One thing that Rob McKenna talks about is focusing, or really continuing what the governor has already focused on, which is early childhood learning, and to focus money there, and to perhaps, for McKenna, to focus more money there at perhaps higher education. Other places may sacrifice. Something has to give in education. We don't have the money for meeting all the demands, and we have a court mandate. So when you talk about finding new money, where?
So I'm going to answer that, but I want to say this first if I can, and that is that we cannot wait for us to get in the perfect fiscal condition to actually start making some reforms that we can make now that really do not cost a lot of money. And I think that's important to say because we have an obvious, serious shortcoming in our fiscal support, both for K through 12 and our colleges. That is clear. We all agree on that. But we can't allow that to stop us from doing some of the reforms that I think are appropriate to try to wring as much education as we can out of our existing resources. And I'm seeing this happen across the state of Washington. I was just talking to Gary Cohn, superintendent of Everett, the other night. You know, they've increased their graduation rate by 30%, in the last several years. Pasco has done the same thing in about 3 or 4 years by developing some really risk-based targeting to try to target students that are in trouble and get them to stay in school. I just want to point out that we can't have, it can't be seen as an excuse for inaction is what I'm saying, and I'm proposing a variety of reforms. Perhaps we can talk about them. But the fiscal issue is pretty clear, and again, I come back to we got to diagnose what the problem is. The problem is there's 300,000 people not working in the state of Washington. And those people are not buying goods and services, they are not traveling, they're not turning over houses, and as a result, we have a lack of fiscal support for education. And that's what we've got to focus on, number one. And that's why I have a job creation program to get at the heart of that problem. But number two, here's a really important point. If you look at the budget of the state of Washington last decade, there's been a continual hemorrhaging of money out of the education budget and into the healthcare budget. Almost a one-to-one correlation. And that has resulted largely from the inflation rate that we have in our healthcare costs. It is clear to me that we have to have an ability to adopt a preventative healthcare system to reduce the rate of medical inflation to be able to find money to adequately fund education. And to do that, we have to basically say this. We're going to have a real healthcare system instead of just a sick care system. We are going to help people, we're going to help people avoid diabetes instead of just amputating their leg after they get diabetes. We're going to attack the issue of hypertension and some cardiac issues. We're going to continue our efforts on nicotine addiction suppression. And we're going to tackle what I think is one of the most serious epidemics in the state of Washington, and that's childhood obesity, that I'm very, very concerned about. Now, if we do these things, we will be able to reduce the rate of medical inflation and plow more money back into our colleges that are hemorrhaging. You may have seen tuition can go up to $20,000 a person in several years if we don't do this. This is a source of savings to put in education. Now, we also have to do some things that basically involve efficiency in state government. I've seen what Boeing has done with their lean management systems of quality improvement. I've seen what Virginia Mason Hospital has done. They were ranked #1 hospital in the country a couple years ago. They've embraced issues of systems of quality improvement to try to find inefficiencies and bring efficiencies to your system. And we need to do that throughout every agency and state government. I'm dedicated to that. So we do those 4 things. We're going to create more resources. It's not going to happen overnight, but that's the direction we need to go.
The Governor Gregoire has said, we're cutting bone now. We've cut the fat. The efficiencies have been cut. Is she wrong?
No, we have certainly cut services in ways that have really impacted people. I was just talking to a group of economic development experts in Everett this morning, and 2 people came on who are cerebral palsy folks who have been employed in the past, who now find it very difficult to be employed because they've lost some transportation services to be able to get from their home to the place of work.
Well, that's her point. We've cut down to services.
Let me finish. We have cut services, and there's no question about that. But I do believe that there are still significant efficiencies in our systems of state government. Here's the reason I believe that. That's not because people are not working hard in state government. It's not because we don't have people who are conscientious in their job. The reason is that we have organizational structures that have not used the new private sector means of organizing their systems to get better productivity. Let me tell you why I believe in this. If you go to Virginia Mason Hospital, every week they have a thing called the Wall of Quality. And every week they bring in a department, and the department takes one of their processes, and they go through it step by step, from the scrub nurse to the orderly to the neurosurgeon to the director of the hospital. And they take little yellow sticky tabs and they march that process all the way across the wall. And they go through every one of those steps, and they find places they can be consolidated, places they can be shortened, places they can be eliminated. And they have found huge savings in their operations and have allowed them to simultaneously reduce costs and reduce infection rates of the time people get sick by getting infected in a hospital. We have not adopted this approach to state government. Now, Governor Gregoire, to her credit, has started this in a couple of agencies. There are a couple agencies where this process is starting.
Which ones?
Liquor Control Board, and there's a couple others that are doing some small efforts in this regard. But to make this work, I've been doing a lot of studying about this. It is clear that you need a chief executive officer that is very dedicated to this. This doesn't happen overnight. Change is difficult, as we know, and I will be intent on making this happen. Just one other little example. I helped with other people win this tanker contract for Boeing, right? It means thousands and thousands of jobs. And I was pleased that it was my amendment that passed the House of Representatives, which did not allow the Department of Defense to give Airbus the ability to use $5 billion of illegal subsidies. I was really happy to pass that amendment. That was a good message to the Department of Defense. But the bigger reason we won that contract is that Boeing was able to use these quality systems that I'm talking about to reduce some of the costs of the fabrication of the tanker. And so we could low bid, we could beat the bid of Airbus. Now that's a perfect example about what we're capable of doing if we do it in state government, and I intend to lead that effort.
Governor Locke talked about POG, wasn't that Principles of Government?
Different idea. Very different
how is
idea.
it different?
Those ideas basically tried to prioritize results. Our proposal using lean management is to look for every single way to bring coordination to reduce the steps involved in a process. It is an internal process to look at the process and how it works. It is a very different science. It started with Toyota. Okay? And it came back to Boeing and Ford and Virginia Mason, now it needs to get to the state of Washington. By the way, King County's having some good experiences with this. There are governments that are doing this. It's time for our state to do it.
Why do you assume that the workers in these agencies will work with you on that?
First off, because where organizations have had leadership willing to invest the time and energy to do this, they've been largely successful, and here's the reason. When you do this right, you are basically empowering line personnel to have more control over the operation. Done right, this is a bottom-up process. Here's an example. At Virginia Mason Hospital, when they first started doing this, they started looking at their operations situation. And the scrub nurse came to the president of the hospital and said, why do we have the sponges over here? I have to walk twice as far. And the sponges are right next to something else, and I could get confused and leave one in the patient that I shouldn't do. Now, that empowered the scrub nurse. It didn't empower the CEO of the hospital. And that's why it's been successful, and people have really rallied to it. Now, the other reason is, frankly, now I know there's a lot of people who sort of make political hay trying to say that people who work for the public are sort of inherently unconcerned about their job or not dedicated to what they do. I frankly reject that proposition. I look at teachers, I look at firefighters, I look at nurses, I look at people who are working for the foster care agencies to try to reduce the abuse of our kids. These are people who care about what they do. And when you give them an opportunity to improve what they do and protect more kids per foster care employee, they will respond. So I'm optimistic.
Now, you yourself have complained about the number of I will call them middle managers in state government.
Yeah.
So if these principles are applied, don't you by definition have to reduce the number of people working for the government?
Well, I've proposed, we have a mid-management tier in our state agencies that I think has grown faster than is necessary. And so I have proposed, I do believe we can flatten some of our organizational structure. I believe basically organizations with the advent of new technology that allows information sharing from the top to the bottom without 2 or 3 levels in between generally should try to flatten out. Ours has actually done the reverse. So I've suggested we need to reduce some of the mid-management folks in our state government. Now, no, what's going to happen is, and frankly, one of the things to make this process work, you have to sort of let people know you're not going to design your way out of a job, right? You got to make sure they're going to cooperate. That's what Boeing has found. That's what Virginia Mason has found. But we've got to recognize what's going on with our state. We are a growing state. We'll have 1 million more people in the next decade who will need services at and health services. We'll have more kids in foster care. We'll have more people needing law enforcement. There'll just be more people demanding more services. And we've got to find a way to bring more efficiencies in order to provide more services. That doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have a reduction in employee. I can't guarantee that, because we're going to have significantly increased demands on the state government in the next 10 years. More kids in school, which I think is a good thing. I'm for kids being in school. How's that for a radical proposition?
In terms of early childhood learning spending, the governor has made that a priority. Would you continue that priority? And how?
Indubitably. I am fully committed to the expansion of early childhood education. Let me tell you why. I think the neuroscience that is coming out, University of Washington really is one of, if not the leader, in pediatric neuroscience in the world. And their research is very, very clear. It is inarguable. The single best time to affect mentation and learning is in those very early years. And this is, I believe, one of, if not the single best investments of the public dollar today.
Do you think this is the time to talk about an income tax when everybody is equally suffering? Or would you put that on the back burner till the next Jay Inslee administration?
No, I'm not proposing an income tax. I don't believe it's right for the state of Washington. I think I'm not proposing an income tax. I do not believe it's right, and I'll say that 3 times if you'd like.
Just so we're clear.
Yeah.
All right, so revenues are going to come from growth, and you expect the economy.
Revenues are going to come from growth, and you expect the economy to be turned around 2014, 2016?
Revenues will come from growth and some closure of tax loopholes, and savings will come from adoption of a preventative health care system. By the way, this is real money. King County has adopted a very modest preventative health care proposal to help people reduce some of their disease risk. They saved $61 million in 2 years. You extrapolate that to the state of Washington, that is in the hundreds of millions of dollars. Now, you can't guarantee that savings because every situation is different, but there are very significant savings. And by the way, I note that one of the reasons that I am glad that my opponent's effort to strip Washingtonians of the ability to get insurance failed is that this gives us some tools we have to try to adopt preventative health care and reduce health care costs. And I just tell you this, I'm proud to say I'm the candidate who's standing up to say I am not going to let breast cancer survivors go without insurance, and I'm glad my opponent lost in his effort to take that away from breast cancer survivors, I'll tell you that.
Will the state be willing to pony up more money in Medicaid for the expansion? And where will it come from?
We should. My belief is that it is both a fiscally right thing to do and a health-based smart decision to expand the number of people who have insurance in the state of Washington. And we have an ability to do that. Now here's the good deal. For the first several years, this is absolutely free to the state government. All of the money is coming from the federal government. Thereafter, it's about 90%. It's very difficult to turn down an investment where you put in $1 and get $9 back. And that is the situation on expanding Medicaid. And I'm happy to take Texas's money. I think Texas owes us something after the last several years. But more importantly, on a health-based issue, look, when people do not have health care, here's what happened. They get really sick, that maybe you could have kept them from getting really sick. Not only do they get sicker, but that they end up in the emergency room. They get treated, and you know how much that costs. It's about 4 times more than if they'd been treated in a preventative care clinic. And they don't have insurance. And who is paying for that? You and me. Everybody in this room who's lucky enough to have insurance is paying about $1,000 a year to pay for those people's health care coverage, their health benefits who do not have coverage. And here's the way it works. They go into the emergency room, they can't pay, they run up a $100,000 bill. The hospital then has got to get somebody to pay it, so they stick it on our bill. And we have to pay it in our health insurance premiums. And it's about $1,000 for every single persons in this room. I'm tired of paying that $1,000 penalty. I'd rather have it do in a much more efficient way to get these people on insurance and take care of this problem. And you know, it's a bad thing either to have people being healthy. It's just not a bad thing. And I think our state is great enough to say that our people ought to have health insurance, and that's what I believe. So,
Thank you.
before you go, no candidate worth his or her salt ever leaves a room without saying, I hope I can win your vote. Thank you.